In the silent forests of Eastern Europe, a soldier could vanish. Not behind a tree, not into a trench, but right where he stood. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a trick of the eye. It was a fabric pattern so effective that it blurred the human form into the landscape itself. A pattern born from secrecy, refined through science, and hidden from the world for decades. This wasn't digital camouflage or infrared-resistant paint. It was a Cold War invention, developed in quiet laboratories where physicists, engineers, and soldiers worked together, chasing the science of invisibility. They didn't call it camouflage. They called it optical disruption. It was tested in snowfields, forests, and swamps, and it became so effective that it remained classified long after the Soviet Union collapsed. By the 1950s, warfare had changed. Battles were no longer fought face-to-face. They were observed from above. Aircraft, reconnaissance drones, and early thermal optics made the battlefield transparent. A soldier's survival now depended not on armor, but on invisibility, on the ability to vanish from both human eyes and mechanical sensors. And so, camouflage became a science. Both NATO and the Warsaw Pact invested heavily in it. But while Western armies still used traditional patterns like Britain's DPM or America's old frog skin, Soviet and East German researchers had already moved beyond art and color. They began to study physics, how light bounced off bark, snow, and moss, how shadows distorted outlines, and how the human brain unconsciously detects contrast. From those studies came one of the most effective concealment designs ever made, known to Western intelligence decades later as the KMK camouflage. At first glance, the KMK pattern didn't look extraordinary. It was pale, almost colorless, a faded mesh of tan and green lines that seemed too simple to hide anything. But its brilliance wasn't in color. It was in how it interacted with light. The pattern's microstructure scattered reflections, breaking up the human outline beyond 30 meters. To the human eye, it didn't look like a person wearing a pattern. It looked like empty air disturbed by leaves or snow. Even early thermal film struggled to detect it because the fabric's loose weave trapped air, making the wearer appear colder than the environment. It was camouflage built not on illusion, but on the manipulation of light itself. When Soviet reconnaissance troops and Spetsnaz units tested the KMK suit, the results stunned observers. Spotters trained to identify movement in dense terrain couldn't see soldiers standing just 40 meters away. Under sunlight, under cloud, even under the eerie green of night vision, the fabric erased contours that the eye instinctively seeks. It wasn't only visual concealment. The mesh design also allowed air to circulate, keeping soldiers cooler and reducing their infrared signature. In the swamps of Belarus and the river valleys of the Dnieper, it performed better than Western uniforms layered with chemicals and heavy coatings. Quietly, without fanfare, the KMK design achieved what others would spend decades trying to replicate. Yet, despite its effectiveness, KMK camouflage was never mass-issued. It remained the property of Soviet elites, reconnaissance troops, chemical and biological warfare units, border guards operating deep in hostile terrain. Even Warsaw Pact allies rarely saw it. A few samples reached East Germany and Czechoslovakia, but those were simplified versions, stripped of the original fabric's fine weave. The secrecy wasn't paranoia, it was a weapon. The less NATO knew, the longer the advantage lasted. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, NATO analysts tried to catalog every Soviet uniform and piece of gear they could find through defectors and captured equipment. But KMK remained invisible, literally and figuratively. It didn't appear in any reports until the late 1980s, when a handful of Western researchers finally encountered it through declassified stockpiles. What they discovered shocked them. A simple fabric that had outsmarted both the eye and early optics, made from nothing more than woven threads and physics. The genius of KMK wasn't in looking like the environment, it was in breaking the human outline. Modern camouflage often focuses on colors and complexity, but KMK proved that the real secret was micro-patterning. Tiny, fine-scale contrasts that confuse depth and edge detection. Even without military fabric, you can apply the same principle today. If you're designing hunting clothing or outdoor survival gear, layering materials of slightly different tones works better than a single solid color. A light mesh overlay over a darker base creates air gaps that scatter light and disrupt outlines. It's the same principle the Soviets used, and it still works in the field. Soviet field researchers understood this through practice, not theory. When testing camouflage, they moved 50 to 100 meters away from their subjects, observing from multiple angles and lighting conditions. Wherever light betrayed an edge, they adjusted texture instead of color. Grass, burlap, or uneven fabrics worked better than perfect paint jobs. You can do the same in survival scenarios. Use mixed materials like dried grass over snow, sand-colored cloth over tarps, or dirt and moss over shelter roofs. Texture breaks reflection. It doesn't just hide you, it scrambles the brain's recognition pattern. You don't become invisible, you become unrecognizable. When NATO scientists finally studied the KMK pattern after the Cold War, they realized how far ahead it had been. Its principles directly inspired later designs like Russia's Berezka, Germany's Flecktarn, and even modern Western patterns like Marpat and Cadpat. Today, its legacy lives on not just in military uniforms, but in civilian outdoor gear, hiking jackets, heat-regulating fabrics, and anti-glare coatings. The same Cold War physics that hid soldiers now helps people survive extreme conditions in peace. Yet beyond its science, KMK represented something deeper. In an age defined by nuclear weapons and global paranoia, the Soviet Union had quietly perfected one of the most peaceful inventions of war, a uniform that saved lives without taking them. While the world obsessed over missiles and spies, Soviet engineers had built something far subtler, the art of erasing presence itself. It's strange to think that one of the most humane technologies of the Cold War was born inside its military labs. Even today, traces of KMK's design exist in modern Russian Ratnik combat systems, updated for infrared reduction and digital detection. But the principles remain the same: disrupting contrast, scattering light, and regulating heat. Nature itself has always done this. Animals, birds, and insects all use micro-patterning and surface texture to blend into their surroundings. The KMK fabric was simply humanity catching up to nature's design. For decades, the KMK uniform remained a ghost of the Cold War, photographed, misidentified, and whispered about in intelligence circles. It was proof that innovation doesn't always roar with engines or explode with fire. Sometimes it's woven, quiet, and unseen. In those thin fibers lay the story of how physics, observation, and human ingenuity merged to outsmart technology and the human eye alike. The Cold War camouflage didn't just hide soldiers. It reshaped how we think about survival itself. From the labs of the Soviet Union to the outdoor gear we wear today, its legacy endures. Because the best camouflage doesn't copy nature, it learns from it. It bends light, breaks rhythm, and vanishes through simplicity. If you enjoyed uncovering this forgotten chapter of Cold War innovation, subscribe to Forgotten Survival for more deep explorations into the technologies, tactics, and survival methods that shaped our modern world. Share this story with a friend who loves history or wilderness craft, Because the same secrets that once protected soldiers still teach us how to endure, adapt, and disappear when it matters most.